Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our October CGBN webinar. I hope you're all doing fantastic today. Before we begin, many of the persons listening and or watching this webinar may be direct competitors in the real estate brokerage business. Therefore, to avoid any liability under the federal or state antitrust laws, any discussion of competitive business practice and or the amount of fees and or commissions charged or to be charged by the real estate brokerage companies to their customers or clients and their compensation and their splits paid or to be paid by brokerage companies to other brokerage companies is strictly prohibited. It is NICAR's policy that we will not entertain any discussion that creates the potential of violation of federal or state antitrust laws at any meeting, podcast, or conference sanctioned or sponsored by NICAR. Please know that this session is being recorded. To ensure a smooth experience, we kindly ask anyone who is not presenting or part of the panel to mute themselves and turn off their video recording. Our session today will run for an hour and a half. We'll start with presentation, followed by the Q&A segment for the presenter, and then once the Q&A concludes, we will end the recording and transition into our needs and wants segment. If you have any listings or trade missions to share, please let us know. We'll be happy to feature them on the CGBN page. After today's session, the recording will be available on the CGBN YouTube channel and the CGBN page. In the meantime, please take a moment to share your information in the chat, including your name, email, phone number, and any needs and wants you'd like to address. For those of you who may not know me, my name is Dimitri Lockman, and I'm the current chair of CGBN, as well as president of NICAR. Marsha Collins is the vice chair and will be taking over next month. Now, I'd like to take this opportunity to express my sincere gratitude to our past CGBN chairs, Matt Badat, Teresa Mueller, and Bill Kane, for their invaluable contributions and continued support. You guys are amazing, and thank you for everything you have done so far. Thank you all for joining us today. Today's webinar is called Navigating CRE Opportunities on a Global Scale with Matthew Won Piker. Matthew is the founder of BN Cordialement. If I didn't misspell that, Matthew, if I butchered that. Paris-based boutique development and programming company specializing in curating exemplary commercial real estate projects. A trained architect with over 16 years of experience, Matthew has led a large-scale development, including the U.S. Consulate General in Casablanca and the Pont de Bondy metro station in Paris. Today, he collaborates with investors, operators, design teams across Europe on projects such as an arts pavilion in Rotterdam, a student housing complex in Paris, and a hotel refurbishment in Vienna. Beyond development, Matthew is the head of professional practice at a Paris School of Architecture, where he mentors emerging talent and fosters connections between the design and real estate worlds. Matthew, this is all you.
Yeah, so thank you, Dimitro, and thank you to everyone for attending. Thank you to Ahmed as well for the invitation, for reaching out, for Teresa as well for extending the invitation. And Deanna, thanks for helping coordinate. I know there's some time differences that we have to keep into account. So I understand that this is actually a little bit earlier than you're used to. So thank you for making arrangements for that. So for those who weren't at the C5 CCIM conference in Chicago a couple of weeks ago, I actually had the opportunity to do a small speech, well, more of a presentation with Alex Ruggieri on what it means to kind of be globally connected in the commercial real estate world. And it was interesting because he and our presence there was almost the best case in point for what we wanted to convey, which is we had actually met earlier this year at the MIPIM conference in Cannes, in France, which is, for those of you, I'm sure you know this, but it's the largest real estate conference in the world. It's where basically everyone comes to kind of see and be seen, but it's also kind of a way to get your feet in the water and really figure out what is actually of interest to you. And I think that what I would like to maybe take a few minutes to share with you is just a very brief overview of how I got to doing what I'm doing today, and then maybe a little bit of explanation into what it is actually that I'm doing and how I actually work with organizations, people, companies that are complementary to what I do. And that actually includes quite a lot of the time it includes brokers or people who are involved in the transaction, whether it be the buying, selling, the structuring of joint ventures, that sort of thing. So I often find that there are great ways to team up with people who are in the commercial real estate industry so we can obviously do business together. But sometimes it's just about helping out a friend too. And some of the best relationships that I've made in my life as an adult now here in Paris have come from actually attending some real estate events. And so I'll talk a little bit about that as well. So just a quick background myself. I am originally from Indiana. I went to U of I for undergrad as an architect, and then I went to the University of Cincinnati. Yes, go Illini. And then I went to the University of Cincinnati for my graduate degree, and I graduated in 2010. So you can do the math if you want. And it was actually during that time that I had to do a study abroad experience, and that was pretty much still the fallout from the subprime mortgage crisis, and there wasn't anything in the United States that I found to be really tickling my fancy, so to speak. So I started applying everywhere. In Europe, there were actually a lot of opportunities in France, and I guess to make a really long story short, I really enjoyed the opportunity during the internship, and they liked me as well. So I came back following a year later, following my degree, and I've never left. But from Paris is where I have kind of built a home base, and it spreads out all throughout Europe in terms of the professional kind of day to day. But then, as was the case this past September, sometimes I have the opportunity to actually come back to the United States to do business there, obviously mixing that in with friends and family and whatnot. I also do a little bit of work in Africa and in Asia. I'm going to I'm going to share my screen so I think it's interesting if I show a little bit, some images of what I'm going to be talking about. I had to just send a request, I believe, to someone.
There we go. Yes, thank you.
Okay, so I'm sure you're all aware that in Europe there are a lot of old things, a lot of old buildings, and a lot of the real estate opportunities involve repurposing them, adding on to them, maybe partially, doing some partial demolition and whatnot. And so when I was still working in a more traditional role in architecture, I had the opportunity to work on the refurbishment of the Milan railway station in Italy, where the goal was to actually transition it into more of a lifestyle and commercial, shopping center experience. That was my first kind of foray into understanding how the commercial real estate market works. From there, I kind of very quickly had my first opportunity to kind of set a real deal in motion, and I put together a team, buyer, with the land developer as well, and of course the design team to do the Radisson Blu Hotel in Casablanca, which is actually under construction today. It's actually it's a 4-star hotel that they're actually renovating an Art Deco building that had been abandoned for a really long time. They're going to put, boutique amenities in there. They're going to do like a shopping promenade and a rooftop bar and whatnot. But I think that was what really then whet my appetite even more for trying to get ahead of the curve in detecting where opportunities could arise. And I will say that this is just my personal stance. What I actually put my energy into, without even knowing it at the beginning, is this going to, even though there are going to be a lot of moments that are difficult, right, in doing deals, I kind of really wanted to figure out, is there going to be a moment in this kind of project process that I'm going to really enjoy because of the nature of the project, even because of the people I get to work with. So I think it's something that I hope that might be conveyed in the examples that I'm showing, that there's sort of a quality of like, wow, that's interesting, or wow, that's unique. And I also find that if I feel that way, the people that I'm working with, they actually also find the topic or the project also very worthwhile, which in short also leads to a almost like a better rate of return or a better chance that the project can succeed or that we might be able to work together again in the future. The last project I worked on that was closer to home here in Paris, when I was more of like a traditional architect, still involved me putting real estate developers and potential buyers, meaning investors, into the fray very early on. And this was, for those of you who know Paris, this is near Sacré-Cœur. So it's in a very touristy area of the city, but it also is in a very, like, you know, maybe a traditionally what you would think of as the blue collar neighborhood, but there are a lot of young professionals as well. And so the city actually worked with private owners to put forth many parcels into having a redevelopment scheme. And what was interesting is the city valued, and still does to this day, values a lot of the input from architects and actually requests that architects are very, very engaged, very involved in the setup of the actual real estate opportunity. So with that in mind, I guess I'm going to just share that what I do today is detect these opportunities. Detecting them is, it's probably not very surprising, not very easy, and they kind of come at me from basically at any given moment. I could have, a message on LinkedIn, I could have emails, I could have a phone call, I could have someone who's saying, oh, I just referred you to this person, but I never know when it's going to come. And obviously there are even what you would consider, more public opportunities where there might be a tender that I have to go out for and I try to assemble a team. So I'm always in this sort of, albeit uncomfortable zone of not really knowing where my next meal is. And I kind of feel like that is very similar to well, maybe the job market in general, to be honest, but also to the real estate brokerage model, because it means I have to anticipate and be much more anticipatory than I am reactionary. So one of the ways that I've tried to create my business, which is called bien cordialement, which in English means best regards, is to try to identify actions that I think can help me get out in front of opportunities. And one of those ways is by organizing, participating, and I would say kind of like convening events. And so this is an example from about a year and a half ago where we actually, with a school and a lot of my real estate and design buddies, we did a festival that shone a spotlight on market trends, also what it means to try to do work in contemporary society, where you're actually having to deal with things like obviously environmental standards that are becoming more stringent, or you're dealing with things where, geopolitically there's a war that erupts and therefore that basically changes your entire bottom line. So the goal here was to put together an event that then led to opportunities that could emerge from that because of the people that were going to be there. One of the things that actually came from this was near the Invalides in Paris, there was an obsolete, destitute kind of office building, not very big, only 700 to 800 square meters, but they needed a complete overhaul of it in order to potentially put it on the market or to even maybe keep it as an asset and then rent it out. So a lot of the examples I'm going to show you are also in, remember, the sort of redevelopment scheme, because not only is that what interests me, but it's also what I find to be my business niche. That being said, I think that I have a comfortable way of working with brokers who really understand the value of seeing the potential in the future, almost like, the apartment flip scheme, or when you show a renovation scheme, a remodel, if you will, before to a prospective buyer. And so I actually tried to play on that mentality with complementary real estate partners when we are actually going out and looking for how to set up an entire team. So this was the scheme that went forward from the overhaul of this vacant office building. So that was an example, obviously, of what you would consider prime core high-end AAA office. This is an example that was actually completed again not too far from Sacré-Cœur, of a former bank that we were able to transform into a bakery. Obviously, being in Paris, no surprise, bakeries are quite popular. But we were actually able to negotiate ways that the transaction could follow the revamp of this space in ways that made it easier for the tenants, financially speaking, which obviously makes a huge difference on their return on investment and the health of their business. So it's interesting to be able to also, for me at least, to take stock very early on of what it's going to take to have that prospective tenant or that prospective investor really look at this opportunity seriously. I'm probably not the one, I wasn't the one here who is going to be able to set up a financing plan or who's going to be able to even understand in detail what their core business is, right? I'm not a baker. However, by understanding and even empathizing with their needs, it actually means that we're on the same side and I can figure out ways very, early, again, anticipating how to move this thing forward so that the entire project is a success. The largest project to date that I've worked on was again in Paris, and it was for the entire creation. This is a very large project of contains two hotels, one of them being high end, one of them being a kind of a youth hostel, but like a new generation of youth hostel. There's also some housing, and there are some ground floor commercial tenants. And I was responsible for helping set in place the framework for the youth hostels kind of premier or iconic restaurant bar event space. And I'm only using this example because this opportunity was basically given to me, meaning I didn't really have to work that hard to find it, because I knew the project team that was in place, not only the hospitality people, but also the design team was already in place. And so really they gave me the opportunity to just almost be a project manager on it. And the reason I'm using this example is because in sort of doing the work and putting in the time and the energy to get to know the client, it actually led to the client giving me an opportunity for something that is more in line with what I'm doing today, which is to not only source an opportunity, but then put in place the entire team that is going to be able to bring it to market. So because our working relationship was so successful, we just delivered a similar project, but this time in Vienna, Austria, that again includes an event space, restaurant, bar, and the like. And so hopefully that relationship will continue. This is a hospitality group that is operating mostly in France, but also throughout Europe. And this is, they have assets that many of which are, in dire need of renovation. So it allows me to almost have a preview of what could come in the future, and then because I like it, work ahead to propose that sort of make them dream scenario. And so brokers that I work with, they are, some of them also just love architecture, obviously, but I would say the savviest ones see the value in getting there first. And sometimes we just have, a coffee or a drink to catch up, and they kind of pick my brain about like, well, what do you see coming down the pipeline? where do you think that we could fit in? And usually that give and take is very much mirrored by the fact that they understand that I am also looking for potential clients, probably some of theirs, that also have topics, projects, sites that are in need of that sort of like revamping scenario. So that reciprocity is very interesting because it actually means like there's a saying in French where the elevator is going both ways, and it really is like that. I'm very early on, whereas maybe a broker in the traditional sense, in this case, could be sort of later in the process. And yet at the same time, we can help each other out by flipping the script to where the broker sends me something that becomes the the beginning of a new game, if you will, and by me completing or being very close to completing a project, I'm actually going to send that topic down the line to this broker friend. So it becomes a very interesting like push and pull, but it also means that we can actually go farther more quickly because we already have those relationships. We already know what everyone is looking for, and we actually even preserve, I would say, the client's integrity and trust because we're not putting it out, we're not broadcasting it out to the general public, which I think is also a great way of showcasing one's value, merits, that sort of thing. That could obviously be very interesting when things like financials come into play. The final example I'll give about just sort of like that outreach is this past time at the MIPIM in March in Cannes. During that time, remember that I met Alex. I was able to organize a roundtable discussion with the largest business district authority in Europe, which is called Paris La Défense, which is the La Défense business district on the outskirts of Paris. And they're going through what maybe one could consider an identity upheaval, to put it mildly, because of the vacancy rates, obviously, in office space, particularly in office buildings, and particularly in kind of older generation glass skyscrapers. So, in the idea of how do you give new life to a box, we set up a talk to talk about mixed use developments, but also more specifically discuss what it means to cater to students, higher education, because it's an emerging, well, I wouldn't say emerging, it's a very, very active market in kind of repurposing those traditional office buildings to go into the scenario of live, work, play. It's something clearly that we're seeing in New York. I think it's also something that is very much relevant for Chicago if you're looking at the LaSalle Street Financial District. So again, what came off as like a 30-minute, meet and greet, if you will, is actually something that we're able to then segue into, actually looking at sites, actually meeting people who are going to be interested in engaging or going further with that conversation. Just a really quick in note on some of the things I'm working on today because it might interest you. And it also goes to show you that the sites I work with, they're not easy. And so I don't shy away from complexity. I think that's also one of the ways I retain sort of an architectural mindset in what I do. So I actually have to, see potential in the diamond in the rough scenario, right? To give a tried and true cliche. So this is a project I'm working on in the suburbs of Paris. That is a transformation, potentially, of a former Maserati and Ferrari dealership. So they're not going to keep it as an auto dealership. So what are they going to do to it, right? So I'm working on what could that scenario be. I'm working on potential tenants, a roster of prospective developers, and also investors. Another example, kind of the same, kind of outside of the box way of thinking is there's a showroom and a former sewing factory in one of the densest parts of Paris, and the tenants the person who leases it is also the owner, and they are going to vacate the premises in the future. And so I'm actually working with them to figure out, well, what next? Are they potentially going to retain it? Are they going to sell it? What does that mean when you're obviously pushing up against their expectations versus what the market is showing? Because in this particular area, and given the actual asset itself, it's probably going to be something where there's, the word compromise comes to mind. So this is also one of those ways that I look to brokers to help tag team these types of opportunities where their skill sets are not only more valuable than mine in this early phase of a project, but, if we're talking about professional practice, they are actually the ones who need to be in that conversation because I'm not a licensed broker and I can give my opinion, but it needs to be in a way to where the client has an understanding of the team framework and also is very aware of who is doing what and at what point they are going to be able to transact with not only the broker but also the team that I'm going to set in place. Another example, and I think it's the second to last, is things have a way of coming back around, and I also think that that is something I just want to impart on everyone. I'm sure everyone could be in agreement, but that it's not really a linear process. Things have a way of kind of like cycling back or coming back in the most surprising of ways. And this is an example where near the Pantheon in Paris, there is a building that is for some translation studios of Netflix. It's actually not with Netflix, but Netflix is, I guess, their largest client. And I actually worked with the design team a long time ago to help with the kind of like bringing to like just tying up loose ends, if you will, for the delivery of this project, in addition to some public relations, some press. And again, by just building that relationship, it turns out I am first in line to maybe seeing what this building could look like in the future if, for example, the tenant or the buyer, the owner, not the buyer, wants to opt out or is looking for a new way to transition this project, again, if the tenant leaves. And so the final example I leave you is not all of these things are brick and mortar, meaning they also are projects that can exist in the kind of imagination, and then you actually go out and you find the project for it. And this example is for a repurposing scheme of, again, obsolete, what used to be AAA office buildings into something else, mostly into residential projects, sometimes into hotels or other commercial classes. Sometimes they're going to be higher education or schools or whatnot. But the point is that I am actually trying to, with partners, create a demand for something that is playing on the fact that there's already that market trend in play. And so you have municipalities, again, we just mentioned Chicago. We're looking at, smaller municipalities that maybe are on the suburbs here in the Paris region, but throughout Europe in general, that are seeing, ghost towns because what used to be office, their tenants have left, they're not renewing their leases, or actually they've broken their leases. And so by taking stock of all of this square meter or square footage, if you will, we are able to then kind of bring those two worlds together and say, for everyone's problem, there could be a solution. And it actually allows me to work with brokers who have all of that data in terms of not only lease terms, but also where some of the more, where some of the hardest hit areas in the in the metropolitan region could be, because that is actually where, albeit it's very complex, given that situation, that is where I could have the most value, and it allows me then to work with them to find solutions, usually involving a buyer, the seller coming to the table in a way that is going to bring about a compromise, but even potentially, as is the case with this scheme, creating new special purpose vehicles that actually allow for these larger groups to kind of, I would say, hold, like, bury, like, get like take on the weight together, rather than doing it in a more traditional sense of where it's buyer, seller, and each one has their independent, sometimes conflicting expectations. For something that is this, I would say, systemic and kind of across the board, where there will be no easy solution, it actually is a great tool for allowing these two entities to actually team up for potential projects. And usually the brokers are quite pleased, because it actually means that they can team up and be on the buyer and the seller side, and even potentially just take some consulting fees if it turns out that they are helping with that special purpose vehicle or joint venture. So thank you for your patience and listening. I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have. Please don't hesitate if you're interested in contacting me for, a follow-up call, or if you're going to obviously be in Europe or in the Paris region, please don't hesitate to reach out. Be more than happy to meet up in person. And I'll definitely keep everyone informed if and when, mostly when, I'll be back in the States, because there are actually some ongoing projects that I have in the Chicagoland area.
Amazing. Thank you, Matthew, for that. We'll open the floor to questions. We'll start off with Teresa. I'll go second if there's nobody there afterwards, and then I'll let everybody else go on. Teresa, go for it.
Hi, I have two questions, so I'll start with the first one. Since you are living in Paris, and as it happens, I have a condo for sale in the French Riviera on the south end of France. I am curious what it's like to transition and buy real estate there. I also have more questions about architecture and stuff. But, like, this is a place that is right by, it's in Cannes, so it's by the conference center, it's at whatnot. So, you went there, what it was like to get residency, if someone's interested in that.
Yeah, so I guess from a perspective of, if I'm going to put myself in the shoes of a potential buyer, and when you hear about, like, oh my God, moving to France, what does that mean? Clearly, there's the language barrier, there's the cultural barrier, and that is a doorway, into understanding things. I put in the long hours to become fluent in French. I have to work in French. But if you're looking at maybe buying property in the Riviera, I think what would be the best way of understanding it is maybe see if there's someone who lives there, who would be willing to talk to you, or take a trip there. Clearly, that's also a good way of getting making one's opinions about a certain locale. I will say the Riviera, the Côte d'Azur, it's a kind of like a string of pearls of different cultures and different local pride, if you will, which actually is very enriching, I find. But it does mean that there are some cities. The cities have very different vibes. Cannes is actually very interesting because of its cultural scene, obviously because of the trade fair circuit as well, but it also has the old city, the old town, which is very charming. So Cannes, like, might actually have many of the best attributes of the other larger Riviera cities. in the fact that it is major destination. It has that tourist pull, the cultural pull as well, but it also is quite international, even on the business front because of its trade. You know, there's also the film festival, but because of its trade fairs. But yeah, I think the Riviera is definitely an interesting place for someone who's looking maybe for a vacation home or even to move there. I'll just say the language is probably the biggest thing to get accustomed to.
But for you to get residency, was that very difficult?
It's not easy to get residency in France, that's for sure. I had to renew. I didn't go the route of buying play. I came here after school, so I had to prove I had employment and do that every year. And then after a certain time, they say, okay, well, you're investing your time here in France, so we'll give you a residency card that is even longer. I am not aware of any kind of golden visa programs in France, if that is the question. But again, I'm not an immigration lawyer or an expert on that. But I don't ever remember hearing of any programs like you find in, you know, what you find in Greece or in Portugal or in Spain or even in Italy, though I think that is it's more difficult now. I also would say that on the immigration front, there would just be the kind of duration to look at, you know, to where you have to have your passport scanned or stamped or whatever, and you can come and go. But the best advice I would have for that sort of thing is if someone is really serious about it, and a broker could maybe team up with this individual, but to retain an immigration lawyer or someone who might be able to answer those questions, because I'm sure there are ways of if one invests or buys property, there must be some sort of arrangement for those types of situations.
Merci beaucoup. I have more questions,
Yeah.
but I'll wait till after Ahmed and others go.
Sure. I'll go next and then I'll Mad. I know you attend big international conferences like MIPIM and smaller local events. How do you figure out or gauge which one's really worth it?
Well, I like the buddy system. So if there's going to be someone I know, that's always more fun because those events, large or small, are very tiring. I also find, but it's because of my personality too, I find that like a buddy system is a great way, it's a great strategy for networking because you're actually complementary. So you can play off of what the person in front of you is sharing. It also is a way to, honestly, when you're complementary with someone, have even double the chance of making contacts. And it also means that there is a way to where you're able to maybe hone in, I would say refine your pitch because you actually have someone who is hopefully a confidant or someone you really trust. So as you are, I've done this before, as you are like practicing how you're presenting yourself to someone, they can give you feedback following that. And I find that that's very interesting. But the point of how do I choose? It's basically, you know, time is of the essence. It's a limited resource. I basically do one big event per semester. So every 6 months. And I try to do a sprinkling of smaller ones every 3 months. But those are things like, you know, happy hours or afterworks or maybe like, you know, going for a run if there's a real estate group. It's also staying engaged with the design community because I would say design, I'll just impart this, I'll share this. I don't know if it's the case in your experiences, but designers, they have so much knowledge of what potential sites are maybe going to come on the market or might be project leads. Sometimes that is just because of their client relationships, clearly, but it's also because they're out there looking at the built environment. So they actually see things and they get curious and they're like, oh, I think that that might be a potential project. And I actually have a lot of real estate friends, brokers, who have hit it off with, maybe I've introduced them to present, to a designer or an architect, and they've actually been able to find sites together because of that type of thinking.
Amazing.
Sorry, I kind of strayed from your question.
No. Thank you. I appreciate that. Ahmad, I think you're muted, if anything.
So, Matthew, considering Paris being a historic city, I'm sure there's a lot of zoning laws to maintain and preserve its identity. Have you found yourself with some of the projects that would require certain zoning changes? Or have you had any such roadblocks? And what time frame do you think it would take to satisfy the zoning requirements?
Well, zoning is one of those, I would say, magic keys to where if you understand and if you can have it and you understand how to open the doorway to the project, then it's clearly going to go a lot smoother for the entire team that's involved. So yeah, it's literally the first thing that I look at when I'm looking at a site: the zoning, the authorizations, even what's going on in the neighborhood around it. But yes, it's a very, very complex and I would say, headache-inducing environment, Paris, but France in general. The zoning regulations. That being said, they're also quite innovative, and they are very, depending on the municipality, they are quite open to laws being modified or, providing exemptions. It just means you have to put in that much more effort to really get your project in front of them to even have a shot. But again, that's actually where my skill set is probably more valuable, and one of the ways where brokers actually come to architects, but also people like me in the project field, to better understand what one can do with maybe a vacant, like we're just saying, vacant office building or an empty lot or something that is going to combine the two. Because usually things are not, it's an old country, old city. Things are not very cut and dry. So you're finding a lot of conditions where there's a mixture of various attributes. Like I said, partial, demolition, some reconstruction. Maybe there's an addition to a building. Obviously, that's going to have tax implications as well. So very early on, having an understanding of the zoning is going to affect the bottom line, not only the timeline, but the bottom line. So it's very crucial that I kind of get an overview of that within a day of even looking at an opportunity. It also means I am able to weed things out very quickly that way, because it's because you make your opinion.
Yeah, and one quick thing. So with the different projects that you worked on, just give me a quick idea, at which stage have you got onto the team? There are some you may be right at the beginning, some you were probably called on later to consult. So what is the mix?
Yeah, I would say, and it's funny because it's very black or white, or it's almost the tale of two extremes. Either at the very beginning, because there was no project, and by identifying by myself sourcing the opportunity, I created the project, or at the very end, where when I say at the very end, I'm not saying it's built or it's coming to market, and I have to, the broker is brokering it, commercializing it, but at the very end, to where they've actually gone through a cycle, a project team has gone through a cycle, and they haven't been able to do they haven't been able to move it forward. So I'm almost like the repair man. I'm the fixer, and I have to come in and figure out a way, if it's interesting enough, to put it back on track. But I say that's at the very end because in the life cycle of what I'm operating in, it really is the end. I also have, unfortunately, situations where people come to me and, I'm okay with it, but they ask me, hey, do you know someone who is could be interested in buying this, and this, but I've either misrepresented myself or they don't understand what I'm actually doing because, they want to see if I have a potential buyer, but that's not the game I'm in. I'm not a broker. So it's an interesting environment to play in that sense, with the fact that I have to be on my toes, and as Dimitro is almost alluding to, figuring out where there could be a potential project for myself or not.
Thank you. Good stuff.
Dr. Tinubu, I don't know if you had a question. If not, then Teresa.
Okay, I'll unmute myself in the time. So my question is related to architecture and trends, and specifically office, right? So certainly in America, they have this, how do we bring people back to the office? And so for the office spaces that are not repurposed, whether they try to turn it into multifamily or some mixed use of some kind, what are the trends that you are seeing around you? And especially because you have smaller spaces that you're working with, older buildings. So I'd like to hear what you're seeing in the office trend space.
Yeah, for sure. Good question. So hotels are still pretty hot. I think that even though there's a pushback to tourist residences or Airbnb culture, that type of thing, hotels still remain quite incentive driven, meaning you still have different types of investors looking at things in the hotel world, right? Whether it be business hotels or whether it be, budget hotels, whether it be hybrid flex models where you actually have long stay apartments, or you even can repurpose that into student housing. So the commercial sector that involves that type of like long-term, like leasehold or management contract in the hotel world, it's still very interesting, I would say, for looking at how to repurpose vacant or obsolete office building assets. I also think that hotels in particular are interesting because the return on investment can get you part of the way there to what you were finding in, when offices were booming. Whereas, housing in the traditional sense, even service departments, it's tough, right? If you're looking at the financial landscape where you do a map of, what things are going for, what things are being rented out for or selling for per square foot or per square meter, it's really difficult, depending on the exact micro location, to vouch for, you can transform this office building into multi-tenant housing, because it just financially doesn't make sense. But it doesn't make sense because you won't be able to find a prospective investor, and then you won't be able to find a prospective developer, and you won't find the financing, and so on and so forth. So everything that involves having a bed but is presented as something else is usually more interesting, is what I'm finding. So it's still commercial, but it's still a bed, right? Hotels. Co-living, well, it's still an apartment, right? Yeah, but it has this fun amenity space, right? So it's interesting, and I actually find this to be the case with offices as well, co-working. Co-working is still doing pretty well over here, depending on the micro location. So I'm finding a lot that the stronger the marketing, the more investor appetite, or the more, I would say, momentum behind the project. Whereas if it's going to be kind of a one-to-one, almost like, yeah, it's not an office building, we're just going to make it into an apartment building, that's probably not going to fly. It might. I'm sure there are people who are better or are really, really good at what they do that I've been able to do it, but I've never worked on a project like that today, and I haven't even found a project like that that doesn't include that's not a social housing project, right? Which is great, but that's coming from a political, less market driven kind of logic or mentality. So I would say in terms of, so hotels is a big asset class, but also something that is very, very kind of maybe left field would be the alternative assets like self-storage, data, and or like urban logistics, and even higher education or life science. So for me, life science and labs and that, I mean, you have to really, really know your product and really, really, really know your kind of tenant environment. But it also is a very technically burdensome asset class to get into because of you just like the floor to ceiling heights have to be much larger, and the HVAC system has to be more so. But it's a way it's a way that I'm seeing that saves office building projects that came on the market, that were going to come onto the market at a better time and then fell apart, right? And so they're trying to kind of fix things at the very last minute. So that's interesting. And then self-storage, data, and urban logistics have to be careful because we don't want to create like the kind of like dark store or, take the vibrancy out of a neighborhood that could actually lead to, talking about Ahmed's point of zoning and planning permissions that could lead to a refusal. But sometimes municipalities are, just eager to have anything come in. And to be honest, there's a way to do it in a mixed use kind of thinking that can actually create more of a real city feel, right? So those are also things that I'm seeing as things that are being looked at that weren't traditionally being looked at. And the final thing, because it is a little less hotel-y, would be student housing or senior housing or older person's housing, and like intergenerational, those types of complexes are also, at least in the early stages, things that make it past like the first round of the investment committee meetings, right?
Thank you.
Perfect. Since this is right on the dot, 10 o'clock, Teresa will transition into the networking.
Okay, thank you very much. I think this is the end of the recording.